Hi Booktube, it's Ros here with a tag for Tag Tuesday. I'm going to have a go at the Canterbury Tales book tag, and I was tagged by Brian at Bookish, thank you Brian, and this is a fairly new original tag by AJ Dunn, and they have given us 25 prompts about the 25 tellers of the Canterbury Tales. I mean, obviously Canterbury Tales is by Chaucer, but you know the conceit is that there are 25 different pilgrims on the way to Canterbury, and they each tell a story. AJ has kindly said that you don't have to do all 25, and I know that I can't. I'm going to stop around 14, I think, because otherwise this will be far too long. But they're all good. They're all good prompts. The obvious first thing that one might think of in to say in doing this tag is, have you or haven't you read the Canterbury Tales, or some of them? And I would be embarrassed as a literate English woman to have not read any of the Canterbury Tales, and I have, thank heaven, but not all of them, and not for quite a long time. So one lovely outcome of this tag, and thank you AJ, is that I've resolved that when I finish a couple of other long slow reads I'm doing, like Dante's Divine Comedy and The Ring and the Book by Browning, and Don Quixote that I'm reading, started this month as my March of the Mammoth read, when those are out of the way, I'm going to pick up Canterbury Tales and read one or two a month until I complete those. So I'm looking forward to it now. I've decided to do that. Oh, I'm going to tag people first because that's the 26th prompt and I won't get as far as that, so I need to do it now so I don't forget. And I'm going to tag anyone who's involved in the Don Quixote read along, and I'm thinking of some people off the top of my head that have channels. There's Christina of Knitting Books, etc. There's Mark of Book Time with Elvis, obviously Alan of Big Hard Books and Classics, who's sort of hosting with me. Lisa in Brookland, new channel. Who else? Faith in Books, and any others. So let's get to the prompts. The host. The host is a character who relates the tales to the reader. He's large, loud, and merry. Recommend a Mammoth book over 800 pages for March of the Mammoths. Well, obviously I'm reading Don Quixote for March of the Mammoths this year, but I'm going to recommend that you read one Mammoth March, War and Peace by Tolstoy. And in fact, there is a group read of this just starting. Not too late to join it. I'll link to, I think it's Hannah's Books is sort of hosting, so I'll link to her, because fat as it is, this is full of love and character and plot and interest, and you can skim over the bits where Tolstoy goes off on one if you need to. Don't avoid this book because it's fat. That's what I'd say. Prompt number 2. The Knight stands for fighting, war and bravery. Recommend a book with a courageous main character. I'm going to recommend this one, A Long Way from Douala by Max Lobe, which I read earlier this year. Now, Lobe is a Cameroonian author, and the book's set in Cameroon. It was translated from the French by Schwartz, good translator. The main character in this, Jean, is a young man whose brother, Roger, who he admires but also has a tricky relationship with, disappears, and he realizes that he's kind of gone to follow the very difficult trail to try and migrate to Europe. He's hoping to kind of maybe make his fortune as a footballer. He's football mad. Jean, on the other hand, is much more academic, much more in some ways a more fragile character, but and who's kind of like in the process of working out his sort of identity as a young gay man, and he decides bravely to, with a friend, pursue Roger to try and persuade him to come back home, to not take the terrible risk of this journey to Europe, where so many young men actually don't make it and die on the way, you know. And that throws him into a lot of really challenging situations that are way out of his kind of comfort zone, to use that, yeah, rather poor phrase. Very good book, well worth a read. Oh, number 3. There we go. The Wife of Bath stands for marriage, sex and arguing. Tell us about a book with a strong female character. Well, I thought I should choose a strong female character who is married, and where that sort of is an important kind of part of the book, as this is the wife of, we're choosing this for the Wife of Bath. I picked Elizabeth and Her German Garden by Elizabeth von Arnim. Now, this book came out in 1898. It's, I think, if it came out now, we'd call it autofiction. It's kind of like semi-autobiographical novel in the form of a diary, and it's about Elizabeth, who is a young Englishwoman who marries an older, quite glamorous and charismatic but difficult German nobleman, and goes to live on his ancestral estate in Germany, and decides to carve out a bit of space for herself and separate identity for herself, to make a garden. And it's about not being subsumed by being a wife and a mother, and hanging on to something that is just for you. And yeah, despite the man of wrath, as she calls her husband in this. The real life Elizabeth von Arnim, really interesting character. The man of wrath was her first husband. She had a second husband too. She also had quite a long affair with H.G. Wells, the writer. Ian Forster was tutor to her children at one stage. She wrote a number of books. Enchanted April is the one that people know best, but this is actually my favourite, I think. Number 4, The Pardoner. The Pardoner is all about ambiguity. Tell us about your favourite queer characters. Okay, so I wanted to pick a book with queer character by a queer author. So I picked Memoirs of Hadrian by Marguerite Yourcenar. And she was a French, 20th century French writer with the most brilliant and lovely style. And this is not autofiction. This is a fictional autobiography. It's Hadrian writing his own life story, and including his relationship with Antinous, that was the sort of defining romantic relationship of his life. Yourcenar wrote it in French, but it was translated by her partner, Grace Frick. I think Yourcenar might have described herself as bisexual. We'd probably call her queer now, wouldn't we? It's a bit of a queer classic, in fact, and it's also, also a classic in every meaning of the word. If you've never read it, it's a kind of top recommendation from Ros, Memoirs of Hadrian. Really takes you psychologically into the mind of a Roman emperor, and a fascinating, brilliant man. Yeah, I won't say more. That's enough for that. So number 5, The Miller is bold, blasphemous, and overturns conventions. Who is your favourite naughty character? My favourite naughty character is Lady Susan, the eponymous heroine of Jane Austen's early epistolary novel, Lady Susan. And Lady Susan is wicked and outrageous, and also gorgeous and charming, and you kind of hate her and fall in love with her. And if you've read Austen's other 6 novels and haven't read Lady Susan because you feel like, oh, it's not one of the main ones and it was an early one, and perhaps do read it. It's tremendous fun, and I defy you not to kind of fall for Lady Susan. Number 6, The Prioress is modest, quiet and compassionate. Recommend a book you don't hear much about on BookTube. Well, I'm going to recommend a book that I've never heard anyone speak about on BookTube. I'm not sure I've really heard anyone talk about this author. This is Halldor Laxness, and the book's The Atom Station. Now, Laxness was a 20th century Icelandic author, possibly the greatest 20th century Icelandic author. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature, but he's not, I think, probably Independent People is his best known novel outside Iceland. That one's perhaps a bit long and off-putting, whereas this is a very, very manageable little book if you want a taste of Laxness. He's got great style. You know, he gets compared with people like Steinbeck and Upton Sinclair and so on. This is a book, the plot of this is kind of satirical, political. It's about, we're just after the World War II, and the Americans have decided that they are going to buy a bit of Iceland to set up an airbase. And but we get the story, the main character in the story is this sort of naive young woman from the countryside, and yet in some ways she approaches the whole situation. She's kind of like servant to one of the political figures involved, but she's got kind of more, she sees things more clearly than anyone else in the book, I think. Yeah, read it, why not? And I'm sure I've never heard about it on BookTube. Prompt number 7, the monk cares little for the rule of work and prayer. Tell us about an unconventional character. Now, March is not only March of the Madness, it's also middle grade March. So I picked a character from a children's book, middle grade, I think is what you call it. I mean, that's a bit of an Americanism, but that's Snufkin from the Moomin books by Tove Jansson. She's a Finnish author. This one is Finn Family Moomintroll, but there's a whole series. And Snufkin, there's Snufkin sitting in the tree, yeah, playing pipes. Snufkin is a little anarchist who kind of drifts in and out of the stories, turns up from nowhere, has a good time, does his own thing, disappears again, goes south every winter. Yeah, just a brilliant character. And if you haven't read these books, well, you can see how well loved this one is of mine. Very well loved books. You can just see Snufkin by the river there. Yeah, it's great. The Moomins. I'm not a great reader of. I'm not a great one for reading children's books as an adult, but Jansson wrote both children's books and adults books with the same intelligence and sensibility, and yeah, touch of anarchy in her thinking. That another queer writer that brought a different and distinctive perspective, I suppose, to her books. So, where are we? We've done naughty, we've done more right. Yes, the friar. The friar is all about confession. Confess to us. Have you read the Bible, Torah, Quran, or other religious text all the way through? No, I haven't. When I was an earnest young Ros, I did attempt to. I started the Bible thinking I was going to read the whole thing, and I'm not sure where I sort of ran out of steam. Somewhere in the prophets, I think. But no, I never have. I'm sure it would be interesting in a literary sense, but yeah. Now, the summoner is lecherous and a drunk who tries to sound more educated than he is. Tell us about a book that sounded better than it was. Now I know which one I'm going to choose for this. I don't have it. Well, I wouldn't if it was, sounded better than it was. The book is Like Perpetual by Francis Spufford. It came out last year, I think. And I rushed to get it because I love the setup for the book. It's about, a bomb fell on a school in South London, and it's the imagined lives of the children if they hadn't been killed. Not a school, a shop, if they hadn't been killed in that bombing. It's one of those books where the further I got through it, the more irritated I got with it, and I was really disappointed in it by the end. Should have DNF'd, but I thought it was going to come good because he'd also write. Spufford can write brilliantly, so the quality of the writing wasn't the problem. It was about the sentiments and the plot. Anyway, I'll stop talking about that one. Next one though, number 10, The Parson, is poor but rich in thought and deed. Tell us about a book that gave you more than you expected. Okay, and the book I've chosen for that is Trees on a Slope by Hwang. Now, this is a Korean novel from the sort of middle of the second half of the 20th century. It's a book about civil war, the Korean Civil War, and the aftermath of that, and the impact of trauma. And I was expecting something kind of interesting and perhaps a bit sort of grim. Actually, it was a much more sort of lyrical and poetic book in terms of the writing than I expected. So it scored on every front for me, this book. And I also had the bonus of reading it with Sean the Book Maniac as a buddy read. Yeah, it's translated by Bruce and Juchan Fulton, and yeah, quite an exceptional novel, I thought. The Squire stands for Youth, Beauty and Courting. What book did you fall in love with when you were a youth? No competition for this one. I suppose it's more a writer that I fell in love with when I was a youth, but through a couple of her books. This one, Invitation to the Waltz, and another one, A Dusty Answer. This one came out in 1932. Yeah, 32. She writes so brilliantly about women, Lehmann does, young women, older women, messy kind of love lives, but not in such so beautifully written and so acute about emotions. And this one is about, I guess I was the sort of same sort of age and stage as the protagonist when I read it. It's about a young woman invited to her first sort of serious kind of social event, serious sort of dance party, and all the anxiety that entails about how you're going to fit in, and yeah, I love Rosamond Lehmann. Wonderful prose style. Where are we? Oh, the clerk says little, but his words are wise and morally virtuous. Tell us about a short book that made you a better person. Do books make you a better person? I made a whole video about that, so I won't repeat that argument here. I don't know that they do. But one book that I did feel I genuinely learned something from, which was to my betterment, was Citizen, an American lyric by Claudia Rankine. So she's a Black American woman poet. And that book made me really get what microaggressions mean, what that means in terms of people's experience, day-to-day experience of racism, in the shape of some really excellent poetry and prose poems, and plus combined with sort of visual elements. It's a quite an extraordinary book, which if you haven't read it, do, and it may or may not make you a better person, but you won't regret reading it. Finally, the last two prompts I'm going to do, I've got one book for both prompts. So, number 13, The Man of Law upholds justice and knows the laws by heart. What is a book you could not imagine rereading? And 14, The Manciple provides the food. Recommend a series you think is good from the first book to the last. Okay, so the series is the Wolf Hall series by Hilary Mantel. And this is the third of the series, The Mirror and the Light. And I absolutely think this is a series that is good from first to last. I know not everybody loves them. Some people find them very hard to get into. Some people find have difficulty perhaps finding the voice or find the level of detail rebarbative. But I absolutely loved all three books in this series, and I actually did reread the first two in the series in order to be ready to read the third when it came out, and then read the third. I can't imagine rereading this one, because having reread the other two, to get the most out of this one, I have to reread them again, and I'm definitely not going to do that because life is too short. I've done this conversation before on here about how many books I've got left to read in my life, and I have to choose my rereads with extreme care as a result. And this one is the chunkiest of the three. It should have been two volumes really, but she promised that it would be a trilogy, so she rounded it up all in one. But also the process of reaching the ending of this book was so special, I suppose, knowing what was going to happen at the end and wondering how Mantel was going to pull that off in the novel, that almost to read that again would, I don't know, somehow it would spoil the magic for me. So the fact that this is a book that I could not imagine rereading is not to say that this isn't a book that I enthusiastically exhort you to read. And there we go. That's 20 minutes, so I'm going to stop, even though there's like another 8 prompts to go. But do have a go at this if you fancy. And thank you, AJ Dunn.